Um, then the next slide covers the neuron structure. That means the soma, the axon, the terminal button, and plasma membrane, dendrites. Now, this is the figure that I showed you in the third slide of the previous class. So this is all about the structure of neuron, and these are the classifications and types of neurons. So on the basis of structure and function, these can be classified into three parts. That is the unipolar, the bipolar, and multipolar on the structural basis, and on the functional basis, it is divided into or classified into the afferent neuron, the efferent neurons, and the interneurons. So after that, this is the functions of neuron that I told you: the reflex action, problem solving, intricate network of connection, and the genetic as well as the environmental factors. Then the neural conduction. I told you about the jelly-like solutions present inside and outside the cell, which consist of charged particles called ions that you know, and there are two ions, cations and anions, and these are the positive charged ions. See from the screen, the membrane potential and the resting membrane potential. Then the next one is the synaptic transmission. So synaptic transmission, first I have to tell you about the types of synapse, that is the electrical and the chemical synapse. Then what are the functions or structures mainly, like the next slide. See here is the structure of synapse, that is the three structures mainly: the synaptic knob, the synaptic cleft, and the plasma membrane, and the presynaptic terminals. It consists of some synaptic vessels and the chemical molecules known as the neurotransmitters. So this is all about the previous class that I taught you. So I'm just recollecting that this portion is already covered. Now these are the steps of synaptic transmission, like the excitatory postsynaptic potential, inhibitory postsynaptic potential, and the importance of synapse, how it is important, and it connects one neuron with the other, and it follow one it follow it or it maintain a fixed direction or a fixed line, and it helps in integrating the impulses. It helps in also in just like a filter paper. It filters out the unwanted stimuli. So this is all about the importance and the steps of the synaptic transmission. And now today I will start with this portion, that is the uh, importance of synapse. As you all know, just I told you in the previous slide that how it is helpful, or what are the functions of synapse. That is, it helps to connect the neurons together via synapses, and hence send information that mediates the behavioral responses. And number two, the synapse makes sure that impulses traveling across neurons should follow one direction only, that I told you. And it also helps, just like a filter paper, because it helps in filtering out the unwanted and unnecessary stimuli, and it only absorbs the stimuli which are necessary for the different body parts of the brain. So this is all about the functions of the synapse. Now, what is a neurotransmission? The next slide. See, there are some transmitters mentioned here. Now, they are nothing but some chemicals, okay, found in the synaptic vessels, and when released has an effect on the next cell. Now, there are 100 or more than that neurotransmitter substances present, and it may be mainly classified into three classes, like the small molecule neurotransmitters. It contains the amino acid, the monoamines, and the acetylcholine. So these are the main three substances that are present in the neurotransmitters. Now, there is another fourth group of this category present in this neurotransmitter, that is the unconventional neurotransmitters. Now, there is one group of large molecule neurotransmitters. It is specifically known as the neuropeptides. And more often, these neurotransmitters, they produce either the excitation and as well as the inhibition, both ways. Now, you can see in the screen, there are some names present here. These are mainly the excitatory neurotransmitters like the acetylcholine, that is ACH, then GABA, it is the aminobutyric acid, in abbreviated form it is known as GABA, then endorphins, the dopamine, that is DA, and neuroepinephrine, NE, epinephrine, and as well as serotonin, which is abbreviated as 5-HE. Now, what are the functions of these neurotransmitters? Let's look after all these names. Now, number one, it is the acetylcholine, that is abbreviated as ACH. Now, there are some excitatory neurotransmitters like this acetylcholine, like the some names like glutamate, histamine, serotonin, neuropeptides, etc. Now, this ACH, it is the first neurotransmitter identified. So, the ACH plays an important role in the neuromuscular function as well as the sleep regulation, the memory formation, then the and the other mainly the learning, specifically learning memory. So these are controlled by this ECH, and it also stimulates the skeletal muscles to contract, but slows contraction in heart muscles. Now, these are all about the excitatory neurotransmitters. Now, just the opposite way, the inhibitory neurotransmitters, it includes number two, that is here in the screen. See, it is the GABA. Now the GABA, it is the inhibitory neurotransmitter. So, like glycerin and some other peptides, these amine neurotransmitters are responsible for specifically some emotions, maybe some positive or negative emotions, then control of some motor actions, etc. Now, next one is the endorphins in the screen. So, the monoamines are like the dopamine, the norepinephrine, the epinephrine, the melatonin, and the serotonin. So, these are some of the names of these inhibitory transmitters, and epinephrine and non-epinephrine are involved in motor functions. Specifically, the motor functions, that is the movement, the muscular movements, the skeletal movements, etc. Now, the dopamine, it is abbreviated as DA, is found in the brain, and it helps to maintain the body balance only. So, when it is deficient, then it leads to sometimes some tremors, some muscle contraction, and as well as Parkinson's disease. So these are very important because it looks after the movement, the muscular movement of our different body parts. And the next one is the DA. So this DA or dopamine is released, and it may cause of schizophrenia, one of the most well-known psychotic disorder that you may know. And this dopamine DA may have both the excitatory and the inhibitory effect depending on the synapse being affected. So, That means it involves regulating the mood of a person, maybe the emotions, that means the negative or the positive emotions. Then it may control the sleep and as well as the appetite. So all of these are conducted by this specifically dopamine neurotransmitter. Now, the amino acids are the most common neurotransmitters that are involved in this protein synthesis. So, this any imbalance, if there is any imbalance in the presence of this neurotransmitter GABA, then what happens? There is a problem like stroke or cerebral attack. Hmm. So, when certain neurons are destroyed by glutamate, then obviously this type of problem occurs. So, this GABA is a major neurotransmitter with inhibitory effect that you all know. Now, it helps in reducing obviously the anxiety. So, if any person is having some anxiety, then this type of medicines are given by the psychiatrist or the neurosurgeons or neurological doctors to increase this level. Okay. So, on the other hand, this glutamate is the major transmitter with the excitatory effect. So, an excess of this glutamate may result on overactivation and neural damage. So, this is a very important neurotransmitter that you can see that it can cause so many disorders, and the neuropeptides have some pain reducing effects on the body called the endorphins. The next one from the screen see, it is the endorphins. So there is another neuropeptides which always reduce the effects of this pain, and it is known as the endorphins. Now this acetylcholine, it has some specific functions. So these are very important for your exam. So in your study material, you can find there is a chart that is table 2.1, and there it is given that the what are the neurotransmitters and what are the functions of this neurotransmitter. So this is very important for short questions as well as for long questions. So number one, it is the acetylcholine, that the function is the effects of movement, maybe the learning, memory, and the sleep, REM, the sleep conduction, and the GABA, that is the GABA aminobutyric acid. Uh, it its function is to facilitate the neural inhibition in the central nervous system and too much action potential. Then comes the endorphins. So it is the most important function is to provide relief from pain and feelings of pleasure and well-being. Now, if a patient is suffering from severe pain, then this type of increasing endorphins drugs are injected to the patient to control his or her pain or to relieve his or her pain. So this endorphin is also another very important neurotransmitter. Then comes the dopamine or DA. So its function is to control voluntary movements of the body and affects a movement like attention, like learning, like reinforcement and pleasure. So this if there is any decrease of this dopamine, then obviously that person will have some depressive symptoms. Okay. Then the neuroepinephrine, that is abbreviated as NE, it affects the eating, the alertness, and the wakefulness. That means in the conscious level of mind. Then comes the epinephrine. Its main function is to it affects the metabolism of the glucose level. That means energy release during the exercise. And lastly, the serotonin, that is abbreviated as 5-HT. Its main function is to affect the mood. That means all the mood swings are due to the increase or decrease of the serotonin, then the control of sleep, then the control of appetite, impulsivity, and aggression. All of these functions are this serotonin. Serotonin's functions are all of these important parts. So you have seen that the dopamine and serotonin, these are very much responsible for our behavioral aspects, as it controls the movement, impulsivity, attention, learning, memory, etc. Hmm. Now, this is all about the functions of these neurotransmitters in the excitatory and as well as the inhibitory neurotransmitters. Now, the preceding amount of neurotransmitters, it reflects on how the chemical substance may have an excitatory or inhibitory effect. Like, this helps us to understand why certain drugs are prescribed by physicians to treat a disorder or drugs that are dangerous and should be avoided. So there are some drugs that drugs may act as an agonist, that is, the chemical substance may imitate or increase the effect of this neurotransmitter on the receptor sites of the next cell. So thereby this increasing or decreasing the activity of the cell. There are some examples like anti-anxiety medication that I told you, like diazepam is agonist for this GABA. So as you have learned that GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, the inhibitory action is increased by the drug, and the drug directly calms the specific brain areas that play a role in controlling this anxiety. So this is all about the neurotransmitters and the effects of it, etc. Now, there are some drugs that used to treat the depressions that I told you just a few minutes earlier, that like SSRIs, that is the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor that block the reuptake of the serotonin and leaving more serotonin in the synapse to bind with the receptor sites. Now, which over period of time it helps in improving the mood of the person. So these types of drugs are used for the mainly the depressive patient, or maybe any patient who has some suicidal attempts, etc. Now, this dopamine hypothesis and the role of glutamate in schizophrenia, this is a very, very important part, and you may get some short questions from here, that dopamine hypothesis and what are the role of this glutamate in this psychotic disorder like the schizophrenia. Now, there are some abnormalities in this dopamine transmission, and like it causes some abnormality, like the psychotic disorder. Maybe one of the most important psychotic disorder is the schizophrenia. So this dopamine hypothesis of this schizophrenia states that schizophrenia is caused due to excess activity at dopamine synapses. So mind it is a very important line, the excess activity at dopamine synapses in certain brain areas. Now, researchers have concluded that there is an increase in dopamine release in people, showing the first symptoms of schizophrenia. What is that? That is the hallucinations or delusions. Now, what is hallucination? What is delusion? Right? Now, these are two most important symptoms of this schizophrenic patient, that is a psychotic disorder. So, while you are, there is no object or no subject or no one present, but this type of patient realize or they see that yes, there is a presence of anyone who is always watching that person, or who is or who wants to kill that person, or who is under that person in each and every moment. Okay, so these are mainly one of the example of these hallucinations and delusions. Now, drugs that are most effective in treating this schizophrenia are the most effective at blocking this dopamine receptor. So this type of drugs are given. Why? Because there is an excessive activity of this dopamine synapse. To reduce this, there is some drugs that helps to reduce this excessive release, right? Like the some names are given here. See the amphetamine, the cocaine, but taking cocaine in very regular basis, it affects really the other parts of our body, and it has really very bad effect on our human beings. So also it shows some psychotic symptoms and causes some substance induced psychotic disorders, and these drugs they increase the activity at dopamine synapse. So, this is all about the dopamine hypothesis and the role of glutamate in this schizophrenia. As you have seen that the apart from this dopamine hypothesis, this glutamate also has a role in schizophrenia. Now, dopamine it inhibits the this glutamate cells in many brain areas. So, this what are these glutamate cells? Now, this glutamate stimulates the neurons that inhibit the dopamine, and thus it affects the increasing dopamines are similar to those of decreasing glutamate. So, the effect of these antipsychotic drugs that block this dopamine are in consonance with either this excessive dopamine hypothesis or deficient glutamate hypothesis. So these are the two important neurotransmitters that you have seen, that is the dopamine and glutamate. So its increase or decrease may affect our behavior, or it may cause some psychotic disorders which cannot be cured, but it can be controlled by giving some medicines. Okay, so these are the most important part of this chapter, the neurotransmitters. Now, next one, the next slide is about the neuroplasticity. It has some parts like the neural degeneration, the neural regeneration, neural reorganization, and its recovery. Now, this what is this neural degeneration? Uh, Before that, I will tell you that in the first section we have studied about what are the structures, the functions, the conduction, the transmission of this synaptic region, etc. Now, this section. It is the last portion of this chapter or this unit. Now, here you will see that what are the effects of this neuroplasticity or this neurogenesis. Now, it was earlier believed that the damage to the central nervous system, that means mainly the brain and the spinal cord, which consist of this central nervous system, is permanent or more or less permanent. But it also hypothesized that the adult or when a mature brain was
Excuse me, ma'am.
incapable of any. Yes, hello, yes.
Ma'am, can you differentiate between hallucination and delusions?
Yes, a good question. Thank you. So hallucination means, see, when there is no object present. I told you that if you are, there is a rope, just like a snake in a round position, and from a long distance you are observing that rope, and you are just miss or by seeing that rope you can think that there is a snake, but actually it is not a snake, it is a rope. So this is an example of hallucination. And delusion is that when there is a patient of or a patient of schizophrenia, mainly the psychotic disorder, they think that there is a person always behind me. He or she is watching me, and there is a bad intention of that person. He or she wants to kill me, and in each and every position in my bedroom, he or she is just under my bed, and he's just observing that when I will get down from the bed or when I will take any food, he or she will mix some poison in that food. So these are some of the delusions, the some examples of these delusions, right? So these are very common in this type of patient. So 99% of this schizophrenic patient, they have these hallucinations and mainly the delusions effects. Okay. So now I'm telling about this neuroplasticity. Now I told you that if there is any damage in brain, previously they thought that there is a damage in the brain as well as maybe in the spinal cord. That means mainly the central nervous system. But later on, what happened? Say, like it is before 1980. Okay, but later on they found that no, there are some other effects too, like in the recent advances in the research of neuroscientists, like 1980, have concluded that the brain has the ability to constantly changes the structure of functions of the cell in response to any damage, any injury, any experience, any traumatic situations, etc. So the mature brain is constantly changing and adapting the environment. That brain is trying to learn anything from the situation, from the memory, from the thinking procedure, etc. So this ability of the brain is known as the neuroplasticity, right? So it is also another important point of this unit, this neural neurons and nerve impulse. Now the brain, it keeps changing in the course of a person's life. So with changes in synaptic activity and as well as the genetic and the environmental influence. Now, what do you mean by this neurogenesis? It is also another very important thing. So the recent evidence, there are some recent evidences that shows that the lights on the capability of an adult brain to generate new nerve cells, that is the or the growth of these new neurons, is the neurogenesis. Now, the adult neurogenesis comes from the mainly the portion of the brain which is very important for this particular part, that is the hippocampus and the olfactory bulb. Now, this hippocampus, it is a very important and unique structure, and it is mainly situated in the temporal lobe of the brain. We will study it in detail in the next chapter or the next unit, that is the structure of brain, and is involved in mainly number one, the memory part, the emotions, maybe the positive or negative emotions, and the mood. Then the another part other than this hippocampus is the olfactory bulb. Now, olfactory bulbs are the first cranial nerves whose output goes primarily to the amygdala and piriform cortex. So these names you will find when you will study the structure of brain in in a very vast way, that is the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and all the other several parts of the brain. Now, this diet and enriched environment play an important role in this neurogenesis, while as like some maybe some patients are having some sleep depressions on it, or some stress, etc. So these are the neurogenesis and the neuroplasticity that I told you. Now the next part is the neural degeneration. Now what is this? This is the result of the brain development and any disease. Now it is always affected by some nearby cells, which are known as the glial cells, any degenerating neurons, and any process or disease that triggers this degeneration. Now, when the axon of the neuron is cut, it causes two kinds of degeneration or deterioration. What are they? When the axon breaks from the point of cut towards the terminal button, it is known as the anterograde degeneration. These are very important for your short questions. And what is anterograde degeneration? And the distal end of the axon degenerates. Now, when the neuron breaks from the center of the axon, including the cell body, it is known as the retrograde degeneration. So, when the neuron breaks from the center of the axon, including the cell body, that is known as the retrograde degeneration. So, it is the degeneration of the segment that is proximal cut between the cut on the axon and the cell body. Now, what is then
Excuse me, ma'am.
regeneration? Now, regeneration, it is another important part, that is the neural regeneration. It is the regrowth or damaged neurons. Now, the degeneration, you have known that it is the kind of deterioration or degeneration, two ways or both ways. Now, regeneration means it is the regrowth of the damaged neurons. So, once the neurons are destroyed in the CNS or central nervous system, then they do not recover. But however, what happens in the PNS, they do try to regenerate. That is the peripheral nervous system. So, but the normal functions may not be possible here, and if the recovery process does takes place, then there are different ways. Now, you have seen in the structure of neuron, the myelin sheath. Now, if the myelin sheath is intact, then the regenerating axons may grow through them to their desired target areas. Now, if the nerve is severed and the ends of the myelin sheath moves apart, then no meaningful regeneration will take place. So, these are the processes how this regeneration takes place. Now, if the nerve is severed and the myelin sheath ends slightly, gets separated from one another, then this incorrect myelin sheaths develop that reaches out to the undesired target areas. Now, these PNS neurons have the inherent capability to regenerate that I told you. But what happens? This CNS or the central nervous system neurons cannot regenerate. So, some CNS neurons are capable of regeneration if transplanted to the PNS. Because in PNS, what happens? There, the damaged neurons it against regrow. So while some PNS neurons transplanted to CNS are not capable of regeneration, as you all know, so this clearly indicates that the environment of PNS that promotes regeneration, when an axon degenerates, new axons branch out from adjacent healthy axons and synapse at the place vacated by this degenerated axon. And this is known as the collateral Ranvier. Collateral sprouting. Now, these collateral sprouts may grow from axon terminal branches, where you have seen there are some button-like structures, the terminal buttons, okay, or the nodes of Ranvier on adjacent neurons. So these you can find in the figure 2.2 in your study material. There you can see that these portions are clearly given here. So these are some of the neural regenerations. Then comes the neural reorganization. That means there are some studies conducted on the laboratory animals to study the neural reorganization. Now, after any shock, any tremor, any damage, or any accident, okay, so mainly it focused on the sensory and the motor cortex of the brain. Now, the results of this we have found in some research works of or studies, or the results of these studies may be from Kaas and colleagues in 1990, then Pons and colleagues in 1991, Sainz, Sooner, and Danaghu in 1990. They clearly indicate this cortical reorganization following damage in some specific laboratory animals. So experiments, there are various experiments conducted on the adult mammalian brain also to find or to conclude mainly that what are or how can this adult brain can reorganize its mainly the primary motor and the sensory functions after any gaining sufficient experience. Now, the mechanisms like strengthening of existing connections, maybe some collateral sprouting that I told you in the neural degeneration, then adult neurogenesis, etc., have a role to play in this neural reorganization. So these may come as a short note, maybe of 3 marks each. So there you don't have to write all in detail. You have to write in just short, in brief, that what is the neural regeneration, and just give some of the examples that are present in this study material. Now these are the neural degeneration and regeneration. Now how the recovery part or recovery of the damaged part. Let us see. The recovering the brain
Yes, ma'am.
function after damage. Just a minute, please let me finish, then you can ask any question, right? The recovering the brain function after damage is very difficult. It is difficult to do the cognitive experiments on brain damaged patients, and hence it is poorly understood. But there is some evidence that education and intelligence create some cognitive resources to help the recovery function, or to just recovery the damaged part and referred to as the cognitive reserve. Now you all know that what is the cognitive part, mainly that part which is controlled by the brain, like the thinking, perception, the memory, and these most important vital parts of our behavioral activities. Now this cognitive and the physical exercise helps to recover from the nervous system damage, and this cognitive research or reserve has been used to explain that educated people are less vulnerable to impact of aging related brain deterioration. It was a research work done by Reuters, Lawrence and Capel in 2008. That is a recent study that you can see. Now, with the discovery of this neuroplasticity, neuroscientists are conducting various studies on neuro transplantation. It is a new idea or new thought to transplant some human fetal dopamine cells to treat this Parkinson's disease, like tremor, shaking of the body, weakness of the limbs, loss of appetite, sleep disturbances, etc. And as a treatment for this CNS damage, as well as the rehabilitative training to promote the recovery from this CNS damage. So this is the last portion of this neurons and this nerve impulse. Now you can ask some questions if you have any questions.
Ma'am, can you
Yes.
explain collateral sprouting?
Yes, collateral sprouting that I told you here in the neural regeneration. Now, collateral sprouts may grow from axon terminal branches, where what happens there you have seen um, it clearly indicates that you know that PNS or the peripheral nervous system. There, what happens? There is it is a region where regrowth of this damaged neurons happens. Okay, so this clearly indicates that the environment of the PNS, it promotes a regeneration, but when axon degenerates, new axon branch out from this adjacent healthy axons, and the synapse at the place it vacated by the degenerated axon. So this is known as the collateral sprouting, and this collateral sprouts may grow from these axon terminal branches that you have seen maybe in the section here. See, mm, there are some terminal buttons at the end of this neuron, the structure of neuron. Okay, so these axon terminal branches or the nodes of Renvier, hmm, and on adjacent neurons. So that means this neurons when connected with another neuron. Okay, so that is the collateral sprouts or sprouting. Yes. Any one of you, if you have any question, please you can ask me. Yes.
REM
Hello.
that
Hello.
ma'am, is
Hello.
there any
Sorry.
hello?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, is there any full form of REM sleep?
What?
REM sleep you said no in acetylcholine in that part. REM sleep, is there any full form of REM particularly?
Yes. The resting. Yes, I will tell you. It is given here. REM. It is the resting. That means it controls the sleep, total sleep function. Okay. It is the. I will tell you later on. REM, the abbreviation, the full form of this. All the total control of the sleep and wakefulness. Okay.
Also, reason
Any one of you? Yes, tell me if there is any question.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
for
it's rapid eye
anti-anxiety.
Yes,
movement.
it is one by one, dear. Yes, hello, one at a time.
Yes, ma'am, it's rapid eye movement sleep.
Okay, yes, rapid eye movement. Thank you.
But ma'am, what does this actually mean that REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep?
Now see, when we are at sleep, then also sometimes our pupil they move. Okay, so if you watch any person is sleeping, sometimes there is a movement of the pupil also. Okay,
When they are in
so
deep sleep,
that is
where
yes, yes.
dreams are
Now,
induced.
yes. Now, when you will study the conscious, subconscious, and then the unconscious part of this psychoanalytic theory, then you will find that how this happens. Now, we are in an unconscious state, and we just watch, just like the movies. We are watching something, hmm, and we are visualizing something, or we are thinking at the same time, so there is a movement of the pupil. Okay, but when we are at deep sleep, then obviously we are in a resting position. But all the organs are going on in our body, but it never happens in the coma state that I told you in the previous class, I think. Mm. So it is the brain dead position. That means the heart goes on, but the patient cannot recognize anyone, cannot open his or her eyes, cannot communicate with any person, or cannot locate anything. So this is another state. That is also a state of sleep. Right?
Ma'am, there are
Yes.
some cases where people said that they had outside body experience where they could see everything around them, but they couldn't respond.
Yes. Obviously, there are some stories also. There are some movies on these topics. This is a very common topic. They always select some topic from psychology. Yes,
Ma'am,
and
diazepam in
yes.
a study material, it's mentioned that diazepam is a medication used for anti-anxiety and is agonist for GABA. So, like other medications like clonotril, clonazepam, Zappies, they are also agonists to GABA.
It is mentioned here in the
No, ma'am,
study.
it isn't mentioned, but I'm just asking you, is it agonist?
See, you don't have to go in detail, right? So these, from this portion, you will get some short questions like that. So it's all right if there is not mentioned in this study material. Just don't go in details. So you can study from these only. So this is all about this neurotransmitters. Yes, any one of you? Any question? Now see, you may get this diagram that is the structure of neuron. So please practice before the exam. It is a very, very common question. Oftenly they ask that it carries 4 or 5 marks maybe. The structure of neuron. Okay. So any other question? So please go through this chapter. Next day, that is on, I think, next Thursday, I have another class with you. So I can ask some questions on this chapter. So you please go through it. I will randomly select any one of you and I will ask questions. So that you just prepare these 2 units, and after that, the central nervous system, I will go to that portion. It is a very broad chapter. You have many, many portions to remember. The structures of brain, forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, etc. So may I start today? Hmm? It
Ma'am,
is
can you please
11:07.
explain synaptic
Yes,
vesicles?
yes. From where you get this?
Sorry?
From the neurotransmitter
Yeah,
portion,
ma'am, structure of synapse.
structure of synapse. Okay. So, show the screen. Yes, this one. Hmm. So, how many structures are there in synapse? Mainly three, right? The synaptic node, the synaptic cleft, and the plasma membrane or the postsynaptic neuron. Now, your question is, what is this synaptic vessels, right? This is a fluid-filled sac. Okay. The presynaptic terminals, it consists of this synaptic vessels. This is nothing but some chemicals or some fluid-filled sac present there. Okay, so that is the synaptic vessel.
Ma'am,
Yes. Now you, yes, yes, please ask.
particularly in Genesis, the growth here it is written that it's only the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus and olfactory only if it's possible, or other parts is also it is possible.
Where you are getting this in neurotransmitter, I think, hippocampus.
Ma'am, neuroplasticity there.
Okay, neuroplasticity. Yes,
Yes.
hippocampus.
Ma'am,
No, there is.
hippocampus
Yes,
is
tell me.
Ma'am, hippocampus and olfactory it is written here that the new neurons can produce there. So is it possible that in other parts of the any if other parts of the brain can the new neurons can generate or growth can happen?
No, actually, these are the two sections that this growth happens.
Okay,
Okay, it is mentioned. It is hippocampus and the olfactory bulbs.
okay.
Now, you may get some questions like what is a synapse? What are the structure of synapse? And what are the importance or functions of it? So, it may carry 2 plus 3, that is 5, and 5 for the importance of the synapse. So, for the long question, it is very important, the synapse. Then you may get some questions like what is neuron, what are the functions of neuron, the types of neuron, and draw a diagram of showing the structures of neuron that I told you. So these are very common questions from this chapter. Now the next day,
List some other
may I?
questions.
Yes, please. It is almost 11:10. May I start with the next chapter,
Sure, ma'am.
or you have some question? Now, actually, the next chapter is very, very long. I will take, I don't know, maybe 2 classes for it or 3. So let's start the next chapter, okay? So,
Mama, I have a question.
yes, please.
Mom, what kind of questions could come from neural conduction part?
Yes, neural conduction. So, some very few questions like what do you mean by the neural conduction? What is an ion? What are the two types of ions? What are the common positively charged ions? Name them. What is RMP? That is the resting membrane potential. Then, yes, like uh, this
These are short. These
differentiate
are
differentiate between the resting membrane potential and the action potential. See, it is here. And maybe some question like give an example of this action potential, or what is a sodium potassium pump? See, it is written here, the Na plus by the K positive pump. So you don't have to go in detail, but for short questions, maybe 3 marks, you can get some questions from here, the conduction, neural conduction. Another very important question from here, that is what are the functions of neuron and what are the functions of synapse? Yes, so it's almost 11:12. Now, what's the use of starting the next chapter? Um, Now, next day, you all please do this review questions. Hmm. See, there are some questions here in page 47 in your study material. So go through the summary, that is the main points of this chapter, and you just prepare these review questions from here. See, number 1, 2, 3, 4. I will discuss this in the class, the next class. Okay, and also you do this one, that is the page 45C, explain the structure of synapse, elucidate the steps of synaptic transmission, list the main neurotransmitters. That is given in page 42C. All the neurotransmitters and the functions are given here. Okay.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am, is there any chances of getting questions from the recovery part?
recovery.
Yeah.
No, you can get some questions like what is cognitive reserve and like this. Short questions, not any long questions from here. From past 5 years, I didn't find any long questions from this part, neuroplasticity. Okay, so this is all about this chapter. Mm, so we are meeting on the next Thursday. So first, I will ask you, and you please do this summary part and the keywords, this review questions, and prepare this. See, here are some keywords, some definitions like axon. What is axon? Neuron, myelin sheath, nodes of Renvier. You will get the definitions from here only. What is action potential that I told you just now? Membrane potential. What is a synapse? And another thing, you uh, practice this figure also. That is figure 2.5. See, there is an illustration of a synapse, right? So this is another important diagram. So you may get it. Okay. So I think you have submitted your assignments till now, all of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Devraj.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Devraj.
Yes, ma'am.
You have any question? Do you have any question? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.